What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lasser Cast, where we are going to talk about a podcast, Quiet Part Loud. And I am with my quite loud friend over there, Dr. Zayas God. He's loud in his sense that he loves this show. Am I right?
I am. Really enjoyed the final three episodes. I thought it was a very fitting and satisfying ending to this really interesting little show that we've been covering.
Yeah. Danny's right. We've been covering Quiet Part Loud. We broke it into four installments. We do three episodes every episode. We do three episodes of Quiet Part Loud every episode of our show. So
Yes.
today we are talking about the final three episodes, Back from the Dead, rebranding, and Over to You. So, Danny, I was going to ask you, do you think that this sort of went the way you thought it was going to go?
Uh, I yes and no. I was not expecting the time jump that occurred at the end of episode 9, I believe.
Yes.
So I wasn't expecting that. Uh, I did kind of end up loving the how that ended up happening and the result of that, and how it kind of allowed Rick to build like this almost, you know, uh, very modern army that he creates. Um, I do think it is interesting, because I think we both were kind of along the lines early on of you have this, very Rush Limbaugh type character, and we were both kind of like, are they going to make him the lead protagonist? Is he going to end up being the hero of this story? And as much as that type of character can be redeemed, I thought they did a pretty good job of it.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I I'm not sure I still love that idea, but
Right.
I think they did a good enough job. Um, basically, how the whole thing is about his daughter, and how the setup for the ending is really good. I
Hmm.
really enjoyed that, and uh, I think it redeemed him as far as he could be redeemed for the type of character that he was.
Sure, sure. Um, you know, we normally cover movies, and Danny does a lot of reviews, right, of films that come out, especially when they drop. Danny, can you think of a movie that we've covered in the past like 2 years that is scary in the sense of, oh, this is stuff that happens in the real world, and the real world that we live in is scary? Can you think of anything that you've seen that touches upon that?
The first one that comes to mind, and it's the first movie that we ever got to interview somebody for, one BR.
Okay.
Um, just in the idea that cults exist, and there wasn't anything supernatural in that movie at all. It was just a cult that brought somebody in, broke her down, and forced her to join this community.
Yeah.
And you know, while there is supernatural aspects of Quiet Part Loud, at the end of the day, I mean, it does feel very much like a story of a modern day cult
Right.
that is, threatening the lives of innocent people, and all because of their the perceived wrongs against them, which there were none.
Right.
And and it's a populist leader who is given a platform, and we've seen that in our very recent history, that this could lead to the types of violent interactions that are described in this podcast.
Right, right. The reason why I brought up that question was because I think that this in itself, it was the scariest because of the realistic aspect to it, not the supernatural thing. Like, oh, there's a sound and the sound gets in your head and it drives you crazy. That's scary, right? And the actual sound design makes the creature sound very scary. But what is way scarier is the idea of like how quickly people get turned on to violence just based on what one person is telling them. That's the scariest part of this. And I know that we've kind of talked about Jordan Peele. I mentioned how I feel like he is kind of doing John Carpenter's work nowadays. Like he's kind of filling in that John Carpenter role of kind of commenting on our modern society, with Get Out and Us and Nope, right? This is this sort of glaring, like, it kind of also reminds me of the movie Network a little bit too, because like Rick Egan is like that kind of talking piece that rallies everybody up. But what happens is, like, just plot wise, just to kind of give people an idea where we're going with this, is that Rick Egan was missing for 18 months. And when he comes back, he talks to one of his followers, and the follower touches upon the idea of like immigrants, or not even immigrants, like illegal immigrants crossing over from Mexico into Texas and essentially like creeping into people's houses and killing them, right? Now, we know from like Twitter and just from our political discussions that that's a big thing that right-wing media uses, is the idea of like illegal immigrants either being violent or taking our jobs. And that seems to be the main talking point of the protagonist, Rick Egan. It's like, oh, watch out, they're coming for us. And that seems to be like where the nest is going to be created for this creature, is in this one border town in Texas called McReady, Texas. And as someone, go ahead.
You mentioned John Carpenter. Is it McReady? Is it McReady, Texas? Like Mac in The Thing?
I wrote McReady when I heard it, but I should have looked at the transcript. But yeah, I mean, you might be right. You probably are right.
I don't know. I couldn't tell if it was saying McReady or McGreedy. So I wasn't sure. But either way, it's very similar to Kurt Russell's name in The Thing.
Yeah,
and that's all about paranoia and fear of the people around you. So
yeah, Danny, I don't know. It just took to this conversation right now for me to realize this, but this show starts out in Staten Island and ends in Texas. It's kind of like, oh, I'm kind of familiar. Like it's kind of my life. But
you're not going to cut your tongue out at the end of this video, are you?
I might. Last time we discussed the show, you talked about it being adapted into a movie or a TV show. And I have to say that the very end of this felt very cinematic, or very much like the season finale of a show, right? Like with him cutting his tongue off, like you said.
Yeah, I feel like that scene of him getting up on like in front of that crowd and just going off and like giving them the harsh truth, and then cutting his tongue off to like basically, since it's his voice that is basically giving the creature its power, to like silence himself and trap the monster in his head, pretty much. It reminded me, actually, we just covered the Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, and this reminded me of the episode The Autopsy with F. Murray Abraham, where he convinces the alien being to leave the dead body that he was doing the autopsy on and enter into him, but then he blinds himself, sticks like scalpels in his ears and eyes to just mute himself. He cuts his own tongue off. And so now there's no way for the alien to alert anybody that he's there. And and the alien is pretty much going to die inside of him. And this ending reminded me a lot of that. Maybe it's just because we watched one and then listened to this immediately after.
Right. Yeah, it's very similar though. You're keeping the evil inside of yourself. You're disfiguring yourself. You're taking away your senses to keep the thing inside of yourself. Super heroic. Very heroic for a character like Rick Egan too, for him to go out this way.
I think of like moments like that in horror movies, and like the first thing that jumps into my head is like Father Karras, like forcing the demon into him at the end of The Exorcist, and then immediately committing suicide, like leaping to his death.
Yeah.
So, and like Father Karras is a tragic hero. He's like a very wounded individual. He's having a crisis of faith. He's not Rick Egan, who
Yeah.
is, has done some real nasty, awful stuff in his life.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that nasty, awful stuff, right? So he has these supporting characters that are kind of just pulled into his web, right? He has Gabby, who he brings back to investigate him, and she's kind of there for his sacrifice at the end. He has his own daughter who was brought to Willowbrook, and she then has the creature inside of her when they leave Willowbrook.
Yeah, all of those scenes were really disturbing to listen to.
Absolutely.
Where she's like, "I love you, Daddy," and he's like, "Shut the fuck up!
Yeah.
Stop saying that. You're 13. No 13-year-old's gonna be like, I love you, Daddy. It's just gonna look weird."
Right, exactly. And then there's Vern, the sound guy. He brings him in too, and he's the one that kept the podcast going while Rick was missing for 18 months. And then you have Noor and Khalil, who are brought in as well. And like pretty much everyone except for Rick Egan makes it out, and they're in a better place by the end of the show. He's the one that kind of essentially has to die for his sins. But when he's rising to power and he's making his speeches, that was the scariest part of the whole show. I know I keep talking about this, but it's like I really do think that people probably do talk like this on radio stations I don't listen to. And there's one part in particular where he was talking to this one, like, because he knows where this city is that has these immigrants in it. And his listeners keep calling up and they're like, tell us where it is. Tell us where it is. We'll go protest. And, they essentially want to go and like kill people or like at least hurt people. And he keeps saying, oh, you can't do that right now. You can have a peaceful protest. Like, it's really, really scary that there are people out there just fanning the flames. And I know that's such an obvious thing. Like, obviously, there are right-wing people that are just like feeding off of the fears and filling up people's hate, But it's just such a disturbing thing to hear. I'd actually much more rather hear people smashing their heads against things, versus that kind of talk, that hate speech talk. I hate it so much.
Yeah.
Disgusting stuff.
And it's anything that's topical and like makes you think about the real world and how, like, again, there's this like evil entity that lives in sound and can pollute the airwaves and fester violence, and it lives off of that. But if you just take the words evil entity out of that, everything else about it is 100% real. Like,
yep.
And again, it's not you and I sitting here like on a soapbox trying to be political. It's just a fact that like you look at, Kyle Rittenhouse grabbed a machine gun and went out because he felt it was his duty to stop protesting, and he murdered somebody, was legally acquitted for that, and now he's like a celebrity to a lot of people. And that's, this is the country we live in. We have we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of January 6th, where, somebody said, I want you to go and protest in a peaceful way. And, here we are. And, there's a lot of things in the world that we should justifiably fear.
Yeah.
But, when you live consumed by fear, you start to act irrationally. And I think that's part of the biggest problem in the world today is like, and I think that's what this podcast does such a good job of capturing. It's the complete irrational response to, or to people who are just consumed by fear that they can't live their own lives. There's nothing in their life anymore aside from just being afraid of others, other, whatever the other is.
Yeah. Really good point. It's interesting. I think the show is extremely clever to start around the time of 9/11 and sort of like hint towards our current present day. Like, it's not like Rick Egan is Tucker Carlson today. It's like
Hmm.
he's a talk radio guy in the early
Yeah,
2000s, and
he's
it's
Rush. Like,
right. And then the one line that Gabby says at the very end after the attack or whatever, after he kills him or he's killed by the followers, is if these zombies ever got legitimized by the folks at the top, there is no limit. And that's just basically like dun dun dun, like this
I
is
love
our
that.
world.
I love the concept of her calling them zombies too, because
Yeah,
like I think of like 28 weeks later, and for years the discourse around 28, not 20, 28 days later, the
yeah.
discourse was it's not a zombie movie. There's a rage virus. And I'm like, they're fucking zombies. But like the you look at like January 6th.
Yes,
That's like a rage virus. It's just
yeah,
not, they're not foaming at the mouth and trying to eat people.
right, right.
But it's very freaking similar. I just rewatched November 5th. I watched V for Vendetta every year as like a little tradition. And V for Vendetta paints the picture of, a future where everyone gets, convinced by the government to be afraid and to surrender all of their like freedoms to the government, and the government starts picking out the groups that they fear and putting them down. And again, it's like I when I first saw that movie, I was like, wow, that is a great dystopian fiction, based on the comic. And
Yeah,
now I'm like, wow, that is a uh that is a movie that is semi-prophetic.
yep, yeah.
Same thing with like Idiocracy. Like
Oh.
Idiocracy was meant to be a fun comedy. It wasn't meant to be like the future.
Yeah, yeah. That's the scariest part of this show. And yeah, I mean, of course it's heavy-handed. It is heavy-handed. Like, oh, right-wing media is dangerous, it's volatile, it's hate. But I mean, honestly, it just goes by this idea of, how people are like, well, there's wrong people on both sides. No, there's nothing right about fucking causing people to hate other people. And that's essentially what the core of this show is. It's just like this creature lives off the hate and the spreading of hate. And they are able to fight it. Rick does sacrifice himself so that it doesn't like get out. And then we know that Nor has this kind of special ability. Did you like Nor's power?
I thought it was interesting. I like that there's, a character that has some type of, positive, like anti-evil ability. And because otherwise I feel like they're going to have to, it's going to get repetitive
Yeah,
of
right.
like, yeah. So I do like that one character has this kind of unspoken ability to, drown it out in a way.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, I liked the way that it all came to an end. I also liked we find out that Gabby apparently is either I think she's African American,
Right.
and
Right.
her and Nor have this like funny line about how yep, here we are, we're the women of color who've been helping out Rick Egan for
Right.
all of these years.
Right. And I had to think that that might have been like a kind of reference to Robin Quivers, right, on Howard Stern. I
Yeah,
don't think
possibly.
I don't think that Howard Stern is like a guy that spreads hate. He's not. He's obviously not right wing. But I do know that, like growing up in New York, that's kind of where all this kind of begins. Is like sort of like the let's push buttons, let's say controversial things on the air, and Howard Stern is a major, major part of that.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was gonna say it for growing up when we grew up,
Yeah.
like if you were older, like if you were my dad's age, it was Don Imus, and
Right.
for our generation, it was Howard Stern.
Right.
And I think they would fall more in the line of just like shock jock.
Shock jocks. Yeah.
Yeah, where they would get political, but it would never become the basis of their show. Whereas today we have all of these pundits and these prognosticators who are just everything about their show is hyper political, and it's designed to point at one side and tell you that they're the enemy.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that like maybe the shock jocks open the door for that type of radio personality, you know?
I think the idea that people will want to listen to loud, outrageous commentary, I do to an extent think that, maybe like people heard Howard Stern and Imus and people like that, you know, making loud sexually suggestive comments, and they thought, hey, maybe we could make racially insensitive comments. Maybe we can make politically insensitive comments. And you know, what's the expression? There's no such thing as bad press, right? So as
Right,
long as people started talking about them and, oh, what are they going to say next? What are they going to do next?
right,
Then it gives people a reason to listen.
right. Exactly. And I hope that we give people a reason to listen to the Lassercast on the podcast. Make sure that you guys subscribe to both our podcast channel and our YouTube channel. But before we kind of wrap things up, I just wanted to ask you, do you think that there are more horror podcasts coming our way from Monkey Paw Productions? And are you on board for covering them?
I would love. I mean, given the talented group of people who put this together, and given that it was such a breeze to get through, 12 episodes between like 17 and 25 minutes. I was listening to these on my car rides to and from work. I was in the supermarket doing some shopping, listening to them. Uh, yeah. Made the mistake of doing laundry in the dark one day, listening to this. So
Yes.
yeah, I would love to hear. So like I started off saying this the first time we covered episodes 1, 2, and 3. I had never listened to an episodic podcast before.
Yeah.
I'd never listened to like a podcast show. I'd
Right.
only listened to just people
Us.
talking about an issue. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Whether it's movies, sports, you name it. So this was a new experience for me. I really enjoyed it. I'd like to hear more of it. And if this crew makes more of these, then yeah, I'm totally on board.
Yeah, I totally agree. I hope that Jordan Peele gives Clay McLeod Chapman and Mac Rogers another go. Maybe they'll do a different story that's not related to this subject at all, but just the fact of like what they were able to put together in these 12 episodes, I'd be on board for any kind of horror podcast by these guys. So, yeah, we want to say thank you guys so much for listening or for watching on YouTube. And Danny and I have a couple of interviews that are coming out this week.
You have a
That I'm
couple of
editing.
interviews coming out? I'm
Surprise!
shocked.
Yes, yes. And Danny and I, though, we got to discuss what's coming out in December, but I am sure that we have some great.
Charlotte and I are going to watch the
There you
first
go.
season of Wednesday, which just debuted on Netflix. We're both very interested. Charlotte hasn't been on the channel in a while, and she's kind of frustrated about that. So we're gonna do some episodes. I'm staring over at her. We're gonna do some episodes of Wednesday with Jenna Ortega, which is hilarious because in our mid-year review months back, I called her one of the MVPs of 2022 because she had been in Scream and X and Studio 666, and now she is the star of Wednesday, and her face is just everywhere you look now. So I can't wait to start checking that show out. I just saw The Menu last night with Ralph Fiennes and Anya Taylor-Joy. Another awesome kind of dark comedic horror film to add to the list of 2022. So yeah, we got some stuff. If you liked Interview with a Vampire, you could check out our reviews of that. That was a great series over on AMC. And I am going to get out probably if you're when is this going up?
Monday morning.
Okay, so by Tuesday morning, I'll have my final review of episodes 5 through 8 of Chucky season 2, a great second season of that show. And yeah, and I can't wait to see what's next.
Boom, me too. If you like Chucky, then he was in this movie called Child's Play, and I interviewed the director of Child's Play, Tom Holland. He also directed Fright Night. You can also check out that review on the interview on the channel too. But until then, me and Danny will see you guys next time. Boink. All right.